In this episode, we are going to be reviewing the 1944 film noir Phantom Lady. This was directed by Robert Siodmak, and it starred Franchot Tone, Ella Raines, Alan Curtis, and Thomas Gomez. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. I want to welcome back Greg Woods, who is one of the members of the Toronto Film Noir Syndicate, to talk about another noir today. Greg, welcome back. Thanks for doing this again.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
I've been looking at some of the Joan Harrison produced noirs lately after reading Phantom Lady and talking to the writer of that book, Christina Lane, because I hadn't seen this before. I know that you mentioned have always been a fan of this film.
Oh,
so
yeah.
What do you like about it?
Basically the look and feel of it.
Yeah.
The ambience and the atmosphere of this movie, it just keeps me coming back to it.
It's certainly, Siodmak, of course, who did The Killers, and he was, from Germany, and he specialized in German expressionism. It certainly has the look and the feel and the use of light and shadows. This is a very different noir than we're used to. I mean, mainly because it's a female protagonist.
Yes.
And she's similar to the male detectives in the sense that she's very capable, she's very resourceful, she's very, very confident. I'm sure Joan Harrison had a lot to do with making sure that it was really the female driving the story. Absolutely. What sort of themes outside of the photography what do you see as this really being a film noir? What does it have those elements of doom protagonists and femme fatales and people after money at all costs? I mean, what do you think?
Obsession in a sense, but in this case, the obsession is kind of more for benevolent purposes than for the usual tropes of like money, sex, greed, whatever.
Yeah.
It's about her, Ella Raines' character is Kansas. That was her character. Her tireless campaign to clear her boss of being wrongfully accused for murder.
Right.
In a sense, it's maybe difficult for me to explain this, but I'll try. In a sense, this movie has a lot to do with, well, the doomed protagonist is like her boss, who's incarcerated through most of the movie, and is kind of tertiary to the narrative, really, in that sense. But in the sense, the doomed protagonist is very much governed just by these weird turns of fate. On paper, it just sounds kind of wild that his friend would go around and bribe all of these people to say that, no, I've never seen him with that woman here,
Yeah.
But on paper, that sounds kind of strange, but just because the whole film, well, not the whole film, but the bulk of the film looks so otherworldly, you're given more to how this is all just like a chance of fate stacking its cards against the guy. In that regard, like when you think of films like Detour and things like that, it's just like one series of unlucky events after another that pile up against the protagonist. Yeah. But yeah, in that regard, there's that element with the doomed protagonist, even though like he's kind of like he's not the main character of the story. Ella Raines is, in clearing his name. The Franchot Tone character, like the more you see him on screen, you realize just like how psychotic this guy really is.
Right.
And uncommonly so for a 1940s film. It's interesting too that the movie isn't so much a whodunit, because the first time you see Franchot Tone on screen, he kills Elisha Cook.
Right.
So there's none of this reveal later, like, oh my God, you're the killer. The viewer already knows that. And eventually it's all about Ella Raines discovering that for herself. It becomes more of a cat and mouse thing that way. But in that regard, that's what makes it noir.
Yeah, no, great points, and it's true because this film to me was, even though it's thick on plot, it also has these more complex characters. I mean, the Franchot Tone character, for example, I love the sequence with the detective in the dressing room when you get the sense that the detective is onto him, and he starts to say, well, this person must be paranoid, he must be insane, and I love the sequence. I love the use of mirrors in movies. Looking as Franchot Tone is looking in the mirror, and the audience can interpret what he's experiencing, but he's having these dizzy spells, and I think it's because he's coming to realize that all of those things are true of him. Because I don't, and it made me think of more about the inside mind of a killer, because I don't think killers are walking around saying, yes, I'm delusional, yes, I'm psychotic. They're justifying why they do what they do, and he does that at the end. I mean, he says,
indeed.
he says, well, she laughed at me, and he thought that this woman who was going to run away with him, and that's why he killed her. But in that moment, he begins to almost see that it's beyond that, that there's something wrong with you, that you have, you're mentally disturbed. And I love how the detective really starts to almost like a puppet on the strings. He begins to play him and make him go inside of himself. And I just thought that was such an incredible sequence. And Franchot Tone, I thought, played that so perfectly. You begin to see him sort of go inside and crumble. I mean, I don't know how you felt about that scene. I just thought that was so great.
Well, speaking of the detective, when I rewatched this thing last night, I kind of had to chuckle to myself a bit too, because for the most part, this Thomas Gomez character is pretty useless.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the detectives are all so mean. I mean, off the top.
That's a trope in a lot of 30s, 40s films. They're just so cold and unrepentant that way. Yeah.
I mean, when they see Scott, Alan Curtis's character Scott, we see him go home. All these detectives are there, and his wife's been killed. And they assume. I mean, sure enough, they're obviously they're going to suspect it's him because of the tie. It was his tie, but right off the bat, they're like wolves around him. They're circling him, and they're insensitive to the fact that this guy's wife has been killed. They just assume that they know exactly what they're talking about. And there's these really great, just short bits of dialogue later as they're following Scott around as he's trying to find his alibi, this woman he was with. And they briefly, two of the detectives, there's this little brief dialogue where they're just like talking about, what conversational things outside of the case. And it just made me realize that they're just trying to get this job done, and there's nothing more to it than that. And I think that's why they were so insensitive towards him and desensitized to anything that he may be feeling. But you're right. I mean, he was totally useless. And it's interesting later when he's working with Ella Raines and he realizes, oh, this guy must be innocent, because how could he just hang on to this story that he's with this woman? He was with this woman and he doesn't know her name. So
it's the chaos theory in action, just like all these sequences, events that's so fantastic. This guy holds on to this flimsy alibi.
Yeah.
But then you realizes that it's just through this, this whole chaos theory of one circumstance after another, that he realizes that, it's too complicated to be made up, really, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But even, the thing is that as the narrative progresses, as Ella Raines, gets familiar with Elisha Cook and goes to his jazz session, and then, he comes on to her at his apartment. She runs away to the corner store and has them call the police. And it's at that point you realize, okay, well, Gomez wasn't shadowing her or anything like that. She's just doing this on her own initiative. It's at that point you have to dig a bit to realize that basically the Rains character, she's just doing, whatever it costs, it's her own decision to put herself into peril. She's not really communicating so much with the police to aid in the case. She's just doing it on her own accord, and
Yeah,
putting
that's a
herself
good
in
point.
danger that way.
That's
And
a
it's
good
that
point.
point you realize, well, so much help this guy is.
No, I know you're totally right. And for her, obviously, she was so motivated by love because she was in love with Scott. And
Yeah.
if Scott said he didn't do it, then she believed it. So she was, she was totally. It really goes down to the essence of the story in a way, because she was
Sure.
totally motivated by love. And it's not what we saw in other film noirs where the characters are motivated by sex or money. She's motivated by love. I mean, to me, I thought the character who was mostly motivated by both love and money was the Elisha Cook Jr. character. Because
Yes.
there he is drumming, and he's he loses his spot as the conductor is telling him he misses his cue because he's checking out all the ladies in the front row. And he very easily was bribed by John Jack Marlowe, played by Franchot Tone, to say, hey, you didn't see this guy or this, you didn't see the woman. If anyone asks you if you saw this woman, say no. So there's two things right there. He was, and not only that, he easily fessed up. He bragged about it later. That's how Ella Raines was smart in seducing him and getting him to admit that he took a bribe. But he was like the quintessential noir character. I don't know if that popped out to you.
Oh, well, that's basically the Elisha Cook archetype character. That's the kind of character he always has played in noir.
And so well.
He's the perennial fall guy.
Yeah. The
Big Sleep, the Maltese Falcon, The Killing.
Yeah, The Killing,
always trying to impress people with his big talk and everything like that, and always meets his doom somehow.
Good point.
No, at the time, he'd done a few noirs by then, but as time progressed, that was basically the kind of character that he was known for.
Yeah. Well, he was so great in it. No one can panic like he can. I mean, it's just his eyes are popping out of his head, and particularly when Franchot Tone comes, because he obviously was watching Ella Raines, and he knows that something must have been said, and he's not going to take any chances. And so he's going to take out Elisha Cook Jr. because he may have talked. And I love that sequence, where he's talking about what hands can do. They could kill, but they can also save lives. And it's sort of like it was an infatuation and obsession that he has with the power of hands. And just the look on Elisha Cook Jr.'s face, because he knows that it's over for him at this point.
And what a great shot that is too, just like the hard key on the two hands in the foreground.
Very
dramatic.
The only reason I knew what this, I'm sure the famous drum sequence.
What a great scene. Beautifully shot, those angles and everything.
Yeah, that was great. And I remember when I read Christina Lane's book, she talks about that was, coded to be like a big orgasm, like a sex scene. I had no idea. And then when I was watching it again, because I read the book a few months ago, and I thought, oh, there's something that they said about that in the book. And then it came to me. But when I was watching it, I guess because I'm looking at it from a 2021 perspective, I'm sure back then, maybe because everything was coded, the audience would have been a little more in tune with that. But I just thought, oh, this is a visual motif. Like she's playing him for a drum, like she's egging him on, and she's the one in control, playing him like a drum. So, and then I was like, no, that's not what it is at all. They make it clear. I mean, they keep cutting to him looking at her legs, and she's like, come on.
Yeah, but you had to learn to read between the lines in those days.
Yeah, exactly. But I watched it again, and then it was even more obvious. But I wonder how obvious that would be to people now. I don't know if people would pick up on it. It's hard to say.
Well, was there a cigarette after? I can't remember now.
Well, there were cigarettes throughout the whole, these noirs, right? So it's hard to say. Again, what's so incredible about this, because I want to touch on the plot in a second, but what was so incredible was just some of these sequences. Like, for example, when she begins to stalk the bartender.
Oh yeah.
And she goes every single night. And and I love the way how they just, she's there alone, and then they cut and it's a room full of people, but she's in a different outfit, so obviously that's the next day. And every single cut, and you begin to see the bartender get more and more nervous. And at this point, you get a sense that, okay, this guy must have been bribed or something. And obviously she got that sense as well, but just staring right through him just to see how he would act. And
having Ella Raines stare at you night after night, there are worse fates.
That's a good point. But you see how nervous he's getting.
Subway.
Yeah, that was great.
She stalks him to the subway train, and you just see from off screen the lights from the subway train speed by. It's a beautiful shot.
Yes, and he gets so paranoid that he almost pushes her.
Yeah.
I mean, he begins to crumble in that moment. I think that's what holds the film up, is because the scenes are so dramatic and emotional. Everything from the editing to the acting to the lighting, everything just grabs you. But it's done so well that I suppose, and it depends on what kind of a movie watcher you are, the plot holes go over your head. I don't know if there's a number of things in this film that you're like
it's more a film more meant to be really experienced than to dig into beyond a surface level.
In Christina's book, the behind the scenes is, if anyone's interested, to read the book, because I know like Franchot Tone was someone at this point, he was like a matinee idol, like he was not, this was a very different role for him. So to play a killer, but he was totally up for it. I mean, he was part of the group theater in the 30s, and he was a theater actor. So playing different kind of parts was totally was something that he was interested in.
He's first billed in the movie, even though it's Ella Raines' film, that her character guides the film basically. But yeah, he's first billed in it. So yeah, he was certainly a big draw even then in those days.
Yeah, no, I thought he was really, because he had the right amount of charm, but also was able to capture how psychotic and mentally ill this guy was. What I also liked about the film in terms of Ella Raines' character and even the detective is that they begin to give up, in a sense. They begin to, at a certain point when things aren't going well and they can't find the woman or every person that Franchot Tone bribed winds up dead. They cannot get a hold of it, and you begin to see her fall apart and start to think she can't do this. And I thought that, I love, because that's true of life. I mean, we have those moments where we get confused, we get lost, we give up, we start to give up or doubt, or we don't think something that we want is going to work out, where you didn't really see that in other film noirs of the time. I mean, the detectives were just on that objective no matter what. I don't know if that was something that resonated with you.
I see what you mean. Yeah, it's just that, they kind of blunder into the resolution, much as the same way that the Alan Curtis character blunders into being incarcerated for it, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
It's even it's by chance that all of these, circumstances stack up against Ella Raines' boss. And it's by chance that they just come to discover something like that too. So yeah, it's very loose that way.
Yeah.
That's very true. It's very subtle that way.
Yeah.
But, just talking further about what you're saying, just about like how the film kind of grips you in a sense too, is that aesthetically, the movie kind of changes right around the time of when Kansas's boss is in jail. Because up until that point, the movie, looks like just like another universal quickie, you know, because the like everything's, you know, the cinematography is very gray,
Yeah.
you know, very low contrast and things like that. And then, you know, as soon as you know, he's incarcerated, then you start getting those shots, you know, like the dark expressionist shadows, and that
Yes.
pervades
Yeah.
for the rest of the film from there. The
That's a
movie
good point.
changes right around that point.
Yeah.
And also in the climax too, where Ella Raines is in Franchot Tone's apartment, discovers the purse and everything like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and realize she has to get out of here. And
Yeah. She knows it's
everything
him
in
at
that
that
point is
moment.
communicated visually.
Mm.
Her POV shots looking around the apartment,
How to
things
get
like
out.
that.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, there's no non-diegetic music in the movie,
That's
except
true.
for the opening credits and the
I
final
noticed
credits.
that. I noticed that it's very quiet,
Yes.
you know, and
And
it's
it
very
forces you to
tense.
pay attention to detail.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why the film is complete. That's why the film is best enjoyed as at a visual level, because it tries to communicate everything visually. And
Yes.
sometimes, and forgetting the plot, if the plot seems flimsy as a result, well, so be it, because it seems like, you know, as the film goes on, it's more about, you know, mood, atmosphere, and more about like subjective emotions in that don't necessarily make sense. So in that
Exactly.
regard, it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't help but see the influence of Hitchcock, and of course Joan Harrison didn't
Yes.
write this. This was, but I'm sure she often had a hand in the film she produced that she didn't also write. But as we know, she was a screenwriter. She co-wrote a lot of Hitchcock's films. Was
Mhm.
instrumental in developing a lot of Hitchcock's films. This was by Bernard C. Schoenfeld, the screenplay. But you know, we have, you know, Hitchcock talks about that it's about this in Hitchcock Truffaut, and in this film the also was criticized because of the plot not being plausible. And you know, he talks about this because, you know, his feelings were that film should be emotional rather than, I mean, obviously some things have to make sense within
Sure.
melodrama or suspense and stuff like that, but the kind of films that he was interested in
Mhm.
telling, and which resembled what Joan Harrison was interested in as well, were not were more about the feelings and how to grab the audience on that roller coaster journey. But at the same time, you know,
Exactly.
Ella Raines, we know so little about her, so we're not going to doubt the fact that she's capable of all that she's doing. And that's very much, you know, that goes to the 39 steps, that goes to North by Northwest. Like, how could these characters have been so capable if they weren't, you know, detectives or they weren't criminals themselves? But there's no time to doubt it because it moves. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
it just
exactly.
goes.
Well, even
Uh,
Hitchcock's always wanted his audience to leave their brains at home when they went to see one of his movies anyway.
right,
I mean,
right.
you
Yeah.
always
You can't
like,
please everyone, you know. I mean, I found myself you know, often kind of like, well, how, you know, why would Franchot Tone tell the bartender and the person in the stage show and the taxi driver and everyone else, you know, why would he say you could say you saw him, but don't say that you saw the woman. I mean, if it were me, I'd say you didn't see either of them. You know, like that to me, I just thought, huh? But I don't know if that, you know, there was a number of things, you know, like that, or even the fact that he knew for sure that Elisha Cook Jr. got a good eye on them. And
mhm,
same with the stage performer. I mean, he would have had to have been eyeballing everybody during that show. He would have had to have been so close to them.
exactly.
You know, but again, you
Yeah.
can't please everybody. I mean, some
Well,
people are gonna be like,
sometimes, yeah.
they're just gonna walk out because it's not made. But some people will just, you know, it's interesting. Some people just accept what's being told. You
The,
know,
the, the thing is too, is just like this film, as it progresses, it's evident that as it goes, that it's trying to reach for a different kind of experience.
yeah, it's like a
of
nightmare, really.
Exactly, where
Yeah,
nightmares are irrational.
right.
And so basically, you know, in a storytelling medium, when you want to convey something that's, you know, beyond, a traditional plot convention. Sometimes you have to give something up to get there. So
Exactly.
and so in that regard, like as the film progresses, the plot, the plot that sounds a bit screwy here and there, admittedly, I think you had to forego that just to get to
For
where you
sure.
wanted to go. Like
For sure. Yeah.
to experience, just to have more of a visceral kind of experience with it. And it parlays more into how these flimsy kind of, happenstances stack up against one another, to get into this more fatalistic kind of feel for the movie.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it
Yeah.
works in its own way there. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very well said. And, and I think that goes for any movie, is that, if you're going to tell a very character driven film where perhaps you want to make the people much more important than, say, the photography, and maybe you want the actors to have more freedom and not hit marks, someone like Cassavetes, then
Yeah.
the technical part of the filmmaking will be perhaps out of focus at times, or grainy, or the audio,
Yeah,
but
that's what you have to do to attain that realism. Exactly. You
yeah,
always have to sacrifice
exactly.
one kind of convention to get to something
Exactly.
special.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And how much and your mileage will vary depending upon how much you're willing to accept the loss of a certain convention
Exactly.
that you feel it might need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Art is
No.
a very
No.
subjective
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. No. Very, very well said. It's something that I hadn't really, never really dawned on me. Depending on who the director is, and what the story you want to tell, what you want to achieve. Therefore, you're going to make certain things more important than others.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, there are directors who are capable of giving equal attention to everything, but it's not always important. It really depends on what the film is, and what you want to do with it. So that was really something that popped out to me when I saw this. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really wonderful film. Ella Raines, this is one of her first performances, and she worked with Joan Harrison quite a bit, even in television and film.
She and Robert Siodmak and Joan Harrison, they worked also a year later on Uncle Harry, The Strange Case of Uncle Harry.
Yes.
But Ella Raines and Robert Siodmak also that same year did a great film, The Suspect, with Charles Laughton, which just came out to disc a year ago, and I highly recommend that one too.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Kind of like, she had a long string of film noir in the 40s, like not with just those films, but others like Impact with Brian Donlevy and The Web with Edmund O'Brien. She's actually a very underrated talent,
Yeah.
And more I see of her work, because she's best known today for her film noir, and understandably so. But she was actually very versatile.
Was there anything else you wanted to say about Phantom Lady?
Well, what's interesting too about Phantom Lady is you could also, if you really thought about it, the title itself is kind of a double entendre. Who is the Phantom Lady? There are two. Yeah. There's the elusive woman that Kansas's boss saw in the beginning of the movie and cannot relocate. And there's also, like, if I may it may sound like a bad pun in a sense, but Ella Raines becomes the next Phantom Lady in the sense that she kind of haunts the characters, like the bartender and the Elisha Cook's character,
that's a good point.
Just like in that respect, her figure does become like a ghost, because in a ghost story, what is a ghost there for? To make up for some wrongdoing, to have people to come clean on some evil deed that they've committed.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, she kind of exists as this kind of phantom figure to these guys that wears down on their conscience. It's a good showcase for Ella Raines in that sense too, because she's kind of like this, forgive the expression, but it would have been used then, Girl Friday role to Alan Curtis's boss there. And then, then she really plays up the sexuality, when she's, got Elisha Cook looking at her legs, the concert show there.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good dramatic work for her too, because she like this character, really gives her a lot of different kind of personages to try on, and
Yeah,
does
that's
it
a good
very well.
point. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really, really, really excellent point.
I always loved Ella Raines. Not
Yeah.
only she's certainly a stunning looking woman, but also I think too, like she's a very underrated talent as well.
Yeah.
And in the sense, I envy the fact that you still have more of her work to see, because you get to explore it. You
Yeah.
still get to see it for the first time still. So
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that, because there's plenty more that she was in a number of things, so there's plenty more to see.
she was truly an underrated talent.
Yeah.
She was never an A-lister per se, but at the same by the same token, the more you see of her work, the more you discover just like she really truly was a unique talent.
Right.
And sadly, isn't as well remembered as she deserves to be, if
Right.
because she didn't become another Rita Hayworth or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to dig more into her filmography for sure.
For sure.
Well, Greg, thanks so much for coming on again. Much
It's
appreciated.
been an absolute pleasure, Robert. I always enjoy our talks.
Yes, no, me too. And is there the Toronto Film Noir Syndicate? I know that you're on Facebook, and I know now because of the pandemic, people are not gathering and they're encouraged to gather in theaters. So
Exactly.
I suppose we'll stay tuned on that down the road. I imagine, is that the game plan?
This is it. If any of our viewers in Toronto, have or know of a good venue where we can still have these little screening events in the near future, when it's safe to do so, by all means, drop us a line. Just go to Facebook and type in Toronto Film Noir Syndicate, and there we are.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I'll leave the link in the description box below for where you can check out the Toronto Film Noir Syndicate, and then you can get in touch with Greg through there. Well, Greg, thanks again. Please come again.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If this is your first time here, I want to just mention that I am also on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is an exclusive membership with bonus content, which is similar to my YouTube channel, but a bit different. It is based on polls that you can vote on every single month. So you'll be very much included in the decision-making on what I do on my Patreon. It's just a few bucks a month, and it helps me to create free content on YouTube for everyone who is listening and or watching. So go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And if you're listening to this right now on the audio version of the podcast and you've run out of episodes, head over to the YouTube channel, because every single episode that I've ever done can be found there at youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.